Good morning, everyone. Today we're going to do something a little bit different, but hopefully really fun. I will always remember 2018 as the year when video game developers and people who write on video games fell out of love with people who consume their products. There were a lot of controversies going back and forth with developers trying to push mobile games or releasing crappy merch, and people reacting really negatively to that. It was a very interesting thing to watch unfold. But I had the idea back then that I should check out one of these big mainstream reviews for Tekken 7 to see whether or not I think it's an accurate review, whether or not it sort of displays any understanding of what goes on inside a complex fighting game like Tekken. I think these days when people criticize video game reviews, they have two main complaints. One is that the people who is reviewing the game isn't very good at video games, which is a huge problem if that's your job. The other one is that they're usually trying to push some sort of political agenda in their writing, which I think is a huge problem in any kind of journalism. And yesterday I had some time on my hands, so I just looked at IGN's review of Tekken 7. It's an arbitrary choice because it's just a big name that pops in your head when you're thinking about video game reviews. It doesn't have those problems I talked about where it's like pushing an agenda or something, but it was still a very interesting read. I think it's hilarious. It might honestly be like one of the most misguided things ever written, and so I thought that was fun, and I think we should have a look at it together to determine whether or not this is like an accurate review of Tekken 7, whether or not it's good consumer advice for somebody thinking about whether or not they should pick up this game. So I'm going to jump over to the review right here and we're going to check it out together. I was laughing my ass off reading this yesterday, but this was written by Derry Husky in 2017 in June, so it's an old review and we can't criticize them for not talking about video game or in-game mechanics like, you know, wall bounce, because they were not out at the time, so just keep that in mind. I'm just going to go ahead and say it's a boring thing to say, but I'm sure that Derry Husky is like a really great person and that he really, you know, cares about his work and everything else. This is not like a personal attack or anything. I just thought it was a really fun thing to look at as a Tekken player, and I think you're gonna think so as well if you do play fighting games a lot. So I'm just gonna start at the top. We're gonna read some of this together and see what we think. So it starts out, Tekken 7 is a love letter to this long-running franchise and its staggering complexity. So the first sentence is really good. I agree that that's like the sentiment with which Tekken 7 was made. It's like a celebration of Tekken, right? And it has staggering complexity. I think that's an accurate thing to say. And then the second sentence starts and things go off the goddamn rails quite quickly. Yet somehow it still manages to be accessible to just about anyone wanting to mash buttons. And its huge amount of customization unlocks constantly give you something to strive for beyond its silly and slightly cliched story. Okay, so this is like, we gotta unpack this because it's like weird in so many ways. First of all, if you just want to mash buttons, if that's what you like want out of your fighting games, if you want to see flashing lights and you want to push buttons really quickly, I think go to your light switch on your wall and just turn the lights on and off. It's going to be a very similar experience. If you want to, like, I'm not saying that it's a bad thing not to be good at fighting games, but if you're going to spend like your time and money sitting and playing them, maybe you should try to engage to some extent with the game's mechanics. I think it will be a more rewarding experience than just deliberately trying to push buttons as fast as possible. That doesn't work as a strategy, of course. And then the huge amount of customization unlocks constantly give you something to strive for beyond its silly and cliched story. So it's saying that, okay, so the cliched and silly story is the main thing you do in the game, and when you get tired of that, at least you can focus on customization unlocks and the customization mode. And the reason this is so weird is that the main game mode of any competitive fighting game, Tekken included, is of course multiplayer. And if you're saying that like the story and the customization mode are like the two things that you engage with and strive for, then it just betrays a huge misunderstanding of why people play these games. And I think like most people I know who play this game, they don't go into customization mode and they've never played the story. Now it needs to be mentioned that this is like a general consumer review, and it might be targeted more at, you know, people who are casual, people who might want to pick this game up for its like single player modes as well, and that's fair enough, but we're gonna discover later on in the review that this completely fails as a review for those people as well. But let's move on for now because it's a long review and we can't linger too long here, otherwise the video is going to be way too long. And a pretty good time for fighting games with Injustice 2 knocking it out of the park. Killer Instinct continuing to give us quality content years after its release. I think that's, yeah, Killer Instinct was pretty cool. It's like the one Xbox game I actually thought of getting. Street Fighter V hitting its stride after a rocky start, well, you could say that again. And a new version of Guilty Gear Xrd air dashing our way. The King of Iron Fist term will not be outdone. So it's fine, whatever. The only thing that annoys me a little bit is that he says Guilty Gear Xrd is air dashing our way, because it feels like something like if you're into fighting games and you know fighting game lingo, you know that Guilty Gear Xrd has air dashing, and so you throw that in there to seem legitimate. But I would be interested to know if the person who wrote this actually knows what air dashing in Xrd really is, and you know why it's significant or whatever. You know, maybe he does. Maybe he's a long-time Xrd fan and he plays Guilty Gear all the time. Who knows? On the surface, Tekken 7 is familiar, taking place on the series' signature three-dimensional stages, which allow you to move to your opponent's sides as well as forward and back. That's what three-dimensional means. Attacks are inspired by Asian martial arts and other fighting styles. Yada yada. Movement is more deliberate, and carelessly jumping or dashing can be disastrous. Well, I think that makes sense. Depends on which direction you're dashing. Dashing backwards is the main defensive maneuver you do in the game. And now we're gonna come to the biggest problem with this entire review, because we're gonna start talking about the Mishima Saga here, and I think there's so much emphasis put on the story mode in this review that it's ridiculous. Like, if you want to talk about the single player a lot and then the multiplayer a lot or whatever, that's fine. But this feels like a long review of the story mode, like in a lot of ways. But it says up here, the introduction to Tekken 7's pace comes from the Mishima Saga, the ambitious new story mode created for the console and PC versions as opposed to arcade. So first of all, what does that mean? The introduction to Tekken 7's pace comes from the Mishima Saga. The pace of what? The pace of the storytelling? The pace of a match? Like, I don't really know what they mean by introduction to the pace. If you want an introduction to the pace of a match of Tekken, I think you should play some matches, or maybe just go into practice mode right away and start exploring the mechanics of the game. If you want to get an introduction to how Tekken 7 works, playing the story mode is actually one of the worst things you could possibly do. It's really, really bad as a beginner experience. It's not a learning tool for the game whatsoever, because it forces you to play specific characters. Usually not very beginner-friendly characters, because you have to play Heihachi and Nina and stuff. And then they give you all these crappy crutches where you can do special commands to get electrics for free and whatever. And then you have to switch characters over and over and over. Whereas if you want to start playing this game and get good at it, what you do is you pick one character and you play them a lot, and you try and get some actual instinct for how they work. So it's not a good introduction into the game, but whatever. The Mishima Saga explores the healthy and emotionally stable relationships within the Mishima clan, so he's trying to be a little bit cute here, making some jokes about how everybody in the story is violent and dark. Fair enough. The Mishima Saga, so that's a blatant spelling error there on the fourth row from the bottom, does attempt to portray Heihachi in understanding light by giving motivation for his infamously chucking Kazuya into an erupting volcano decades ago. It is hard to find sympathy for any of the scions of the Mishima family. That's a word that you don't hear a lot. Scion. It's actually used appropriately here, so that's cool, I guess. However, there is a certain charm to the entirely over-the-top nature of Tekken's lore. So we're in the next paragraph and we're still talking about the lore and the story mode, which is fair enough, but I already know what I think about the story mode. We're going to talk about that later, but I'm interested to know if he's going to talk about game mechanics, new game features, new characters. If you don't want to talk about things that fighting game nerds like us are interested in, the online latency and stuff, at least talk about the new features in the game and not what you think about the story mode, which is a superfluous mistake that nobody really cares about. But let's move on to the next paragraph. The Mishima Saga takes an approach. So we're still talking about the Mishima Saga. So let's move on to the next paragraph. At the same time, the Mishima Saga, so we're still talking about the Mishima Saga. It has a short 3-hour duration, he mentions. I've never tried it, so I don't know if it's that long or not. And then we have the same spelling mistake here. He calls it the Mishima Saga mode again. So we're going to move on, but we're how many paragraphs in? So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 paragraphs in, and now we're hopefully going to start talking about something else that maybe matters. Let's see. Where Tekken 7's content does not disappoint at all is in its character customization options. So now we're going into like the one game mode that matters even less. Like if you really like customization in Tekken, like I don't mind. A lot of us don't use it at all. Some people think it's funny to fuck around in, but I mean, if it wasn't there, I don't think it would change much, honestly. It may be a selling point for a lot of casual players, so fair enough. Which put it truly in a class unto itself and sets the new standard for letting you express yourself. If you're trying to express yourself by customizing your character in you know, like in customization mode, I mean. Also, I don't think it sets a new standard or it's in a class of itself or anything like that. If you look at some of the older Soul Calibur games, they had way more complex customization going on long before Tekken 7 came out. Cosmetics are modifiable on an unparalleled level. That is not true. They're just skins. They're just stickers that you put on the characters. You can't change the size. You can't change the positioning. You can only select them, put them on the character, and change the colors. So they're not modifiable at all, in my opinion. But yada yada, we're talking about customization mode, whatever. Next paragraph, extra content is unlocked by completing matches in online tournaments. And extra content, I think, is just customization options because we don't unlock characters or stages in this game. By treasure battles or spending fight money, which you earn simply by playing. The sheer amount of content in character appearance alone would give a completionist a hell of a lot of fights to finish in order to collect all the hats, shirts, and accessories. Like, Horong's starting up the Super Kick Party in a Bullet Club t-shirt. Too sweet. I don't know what that sentence means. I don't know what a Super Kick Party is. I'd go to one though. And I don't know what a Bullet Club is either. I'm just guessing it's some sort of pop culture reference. But again, like, I'm waiting for this review to at least mention some of the game modes, even at a casual level. You know, there's a thing called Rage Art in the game. It's completely new. We have super moves in Tekken. We have 2D characters in Tekken. They throw fireballs. You know what I mean? It's like all of these really, really important things that would interest somebody who is like a very casual player, but we're just talking about like game modes that are like completely superfluous in the game. They're just there because they sort of need to be. But let's move on. These alternate looks partner up with an often overlooked element. So we're still talking about character appearance. And this is where it almost starts getting annoying. But he does point out something that I think is good here, that the visual updates to a lot of the legacy characters, like Lars and Heihachi and all the rest of them, they look really cool in this game. They all had like a, you know, a makeover with their clothes and stuff, and they all look really, really great. And I completely agree with that. It's super, super cool and very well done. However, it's still not, you know, talking about the actual gameplay experience. Okay, so now I think we're something like 9 or 10 paragraphs in. And it goes, underneath the excellent cosmetics, some tweaks have been made to the combat mechanics. So here you go. Now we're actually going to talk about what it's like to play Tekken. Very interested here to see what they have to say about that. Tweaks have been made to the combat mechanics that should encourage newbies. If you're a newbie, you might not understand this, but that's okay. You don't need to benefit from these changes. Okay, so the sentence doesn't make sense at all, and I'm going to explain why. It says that some changes were made to encourage newbies, but if you're a newbie, don't worry about it because you're not going to benefit from it anyway. And I think this is just... I think it was poorly edited, because I think it makes a little bit more sense if it actually says this. If you are a newbie, you might not understand this, but that's okay. You don't need to benefit from these changes. You don't need to understand them to benefit from them. If that's what they're trying to say, then I sort of get what they're getting with the sentence, but the way it's written, it just sounds like complete gobbledygook. Okay, but let's see. How have the mechanics changed? Enlighten me. Relative to the phenomenal Tekken 6, and this is weird, he compares this game to 6 a lot, as opposed to Tekken Tag 2, which was the previous big game in the series that you should obviously be comparing it to instead. And I think it's just based on the way this is written. He talks a lot about playing Tekken 6, so I think he has experience with Tekken 6, which is why he uses that for comparison. And I think, like, if you're working for like a huge site like IGN and you're gonna write these like long reviews, maybe check out Tag 2 or maybe like read up on it a little bit before you write this review instead of comparing it to the previous game in the franchise. But you know, whatever. Sidestepping here is slower and not as useful for baits or defense. It's actually true. Well, as if you compare it to Tekken Tag 2, I think it was similar in 6, but I don't remember because it was so long ago. Forward and back movement is improved. Doesn't say how, though. This places more emphasis on short and middle ranges. Does that make sense? I don't have time to unpack that right now, but maybe it does. Which feels more comfortable for those approaching Tekken from experience with spacing-focused games in Street Fighter and King of Fighters. Because those games are apparently more spacing-focused than Tekken. While sidestepping is slightly less useful and no longer a universal weapon against certain characters who lack strong tracking attacks, careful and expert usage can still open up opportunities to capitalize on mistakes. I think that makes a lot of sense. That's fine. It also helps characters with traditionally slower sidesteps like King or Paul to not feel disadvantaged in defense. I don't know if I've ever thought of King or Paul as disadvantaged in defense, and if I was going to highlight two characters who struggle with sidestep, I think I'd probably go for two of the larger hitbox characters in the game. Maybe I would mention Gigas, who's a new character in the game, and you'll notice so far we haven't mentioned the fact that there are new characters in the game. None of them have been named at all, but it doesn't mention a single new character. And I honestly, at this point, feel like it's because this person doesn't know enough about Tekken to know whether or not the characters are new or not. Really, really strange, but okay. New damage scaling has reduced the amount of damage longer combos do. As opposed to Tekken Tag 2, that's very, very true, and it's a great update for the game. I still think that the combos do a little bit too much damage in Tekken 7, especially now that we have, you know, all these rage drives and things that just allow you to extend, especially when you're at the wall, and 2D characters like Geese who can just really take it out of proportion. However, continuing to practice combo execution is a must as a wall carry combo, as wall carry combos are still crucial even if they aren't doing as much damage. The changes are slightly more forgiving for the newer faces among us who might throw out a poke only to whiff and find themselves getting severely punished. That sentence is funny because we mentioned in the beginning how it feels like they mentioned Guilty Gear air dodging or air dashing to sound like they're like in with the hip lingo, and here it's like they're just crossing 3 generic fighting game terms off the list to seem legitimate, because they go like, you throw out a poke and then you whiff and then you get punished, and then this terminology doesn't appear anywhere else in the review, so it just comes across as like, you know, like your dad trying to talk about fighting games with you. The movement and damage changes are a smart way to encourage people to learn Tekken 7 without sacrificing the complexity that is the series' trademark. I think complexity is a series' trademark of Tekken, so I agree with that. Rest assured that this is still, pound for pound, the most technical fighting game on the planet. Wow, that is like the strongest statement anybody's ever made about Tekken. It might be true. I mean, I'm not going to go ahead and say that it is. I think Tekken is definitely up there, but opening a paragraph with this is pound for pound the most technical fighting game on the planet. I mean, people who play a lot of fighting games, especially people who play a lot of different ones, they're going to have a lot to say about that. And when you're not, when you're obviously not confident in your knowledge about the one game that you're writing a long review about, is that really something that you should just say? It's questionable. While the combo system has been changed to be more streamlined by replacing traditional bound bounces from previous version with screw attack, there is still ample opportunity to get lost exploring the artful flow of each match. Okay, so they mentioned screw attack here, so this is like getting into a little bit that the combo system has changed. I think that's very interesting. There should have been like much more emphasis on this in the review so far, in my opinion. And then it gets really weird. I think this person was trying out the game playing Yoshimitsu. So they say, do I punish with a down forward 2, leading into a longer combo which will carry me closer to the wall, or do I get in some damage with a shorter combo off of an up forward 3? Now, I'm not a Yoshi player, so correct me if I'm wrong. I think down forward 2 and up forward 3 for Yoshi are both 15-frame launchers that have the exact same combos off of them. Like, you do the exact same bread and butter. So whether or not you choose one launcher or the other isn't going to have any bearing whatsoever on the amount of wall carry that you're able to perform. If I'm wrong about this, then I need to apologize to this guy, but if you are a Yoshi player, I mean, chip in, because I'm pretty sure that you use down forward 2 because it has better range, and you use up forward 3 because it's a hop kick and it's got low crush properties. And I think the down forward 2 is also safer, but I don't remember the exact frame data. But one's a hop kick, one's a down forward 2. They're both generic. I think they're both 15 frames. So What does that have to do with whether or not you should like do a long wall carry combo? I'll also mention that it's obvious that if you have the option of doing a short combo that isn't going to reach the wall, or a long combo that will reach the wall, you should always, always, always do the long combo that is going to carry you all the way to the wall, because that's the difference of like such a giant chunk of damage and such a giant like advantage in terms of like the positions of the characters that it's ridiculous. So it's not something that you should philosophize over. If you have the opportunity to get the wall, get the wall. I found optimizing my performance to be a near zen exercise of evaluating conditions, making changes and choices, and I think that's true. It's kind of like beautifully put, honestly, because I think Tekken, when you're just in practice mode and you're tweaking little things, and all of a sudden like 2 or 3 hours have gone by, and you've just been like doing slightly, slight modifications of the same combo with your favorite character, that does happen, and it's one of the like more fun aspects of playing this game long term. Perhaps the most admirable of all, despite the ultra-demanding execution required to master electrics or to visually recognize frame advantage and know the difference between a 12 and a 14 frame punish, Tekken 7 still manages to be something you can pick up, press buttons, and play. It's a very weird sentence. I agree that if you're new to the game, learning how to master electrics is hard, but visually recognize frame advantage is not really something that we do. I don't really know what they mean, but if you're a Tekken player, I mean, frame advantage in the game usually comes in chunks of between like +1 to +9. If you have +10 or more, it's usually because you've done combo starter and you're going to get guaranteed stuff as a follow-up combo. Not necessarily because you might be locked into a stance where you don't have 10 frame moves, so even though you are +10, you can't do guaranteed stuff. But 10 frames is not something that you can visually react to. Human beings usually have a reaction time of about 20 frames, which in Tekken is exactly 1/3 of a second. But I think what they might mean is like, can you recognize the impact speed or the difference in impact speed between like a 12 frame move and a 13 frame move? And that does happen. I mean, it might sound strange, but for a lot of people who play this game a lot, we can sort of feel like if somebody tells me this is a 13 frame move and I do it and it feels a little bit slower and I look it up and it turns out it's actually 14, that does happen. So really experienced Tekken players can sort of visually recognize a single frame of difference. What I'm trying to get to here is that we don't like look at the screen and go, oh, there's some frame advantage here, I'm going to capitalize. We just know the frame data of all the moves, and so we know what move just happened, and we know that I have this much advantage on hit or this much disadvantage on block, and then that's what you base your decision on. And then it says the difference between a 12 and a 14 frame punish. And to know the difference between a 12 and 14 frame punish is not hard, because the difference is that the 12 frame punish is a 12 frame move and the 14 frame punish is a 14 frame move. And if the 14 frame punish does more damage or gives you a more favorable position than the 12 frame one, then you should always do that when you have the opponent at -14 or more over the 12 frame one. Tekken 7 still manages to be something you can pick up, press buttons, and play. No matter who you are or what skill level, you can always just pick old Eddie and start tapping away at the kick buttons. It's the push to take your skills to the next level that requires you to immerse yourself in Tekken 7's intricacies. Ain't that true? It's a very long review and I'm losing my voice. But next we're going to talk about the soundtrack. The action goes down with the soundtrack of drum and bass bangers. So awesome it left me... Okay, so I don't think Tekken 7 has an amazing soundtrack. There are a couple of really cool tracks in there that I like, especially now in Season 2, but there are also a couple in there that are so bad in my opinion that I have to turn off in-game music to be able to play those stages. It's also interesting to call them drum and bass. Like if you like drum and bass soundtracks in Tekken, you play Tekken Revolution, because I think basically every stage track in that game is a drum and bass track. I don't think there is a lot of drum and bass in Tekken 7. I can't think of a single song off the top of my head. There's like some dubstep, but yeah. But I mean, Geometric Plane is great. Infinite Azure is great. So there are a couple of really good tracks in the original release as well. But that's just my opinion. If you love it or whatever, that's fine. It again doesn't really have any bearing on how the game is played or what it is. Including all the Tekken music is a cool touch, yada yada. It talks about Jukebox Mode, where you can change the tracks. I agree that's a really good feature. I love the fact that you can go back and grab songs from older Tekken games. It's a very, very clever way of allowing you to customize, you know, the music experience, but getting around all of these like copyright issues that you run into when you can just choose the tracks yourself and put MP3s in the game, which is what you used to be able to do. And then the last paragraph of the entire review, online multiplayer. So we've gotten to the final paragraph of a very long review, and we're finally going to mention the main game mode of Tekken. Online multiplayer between strong connections has been smooth with minimal frame delay, though we've seen some weaker connections drop during matchmaking. On a whim, I accepted matches on mid-range connections with players from Asia and was pleasantly surprised to find that while latency was not as low or steady as more local matches, the fights were still enjoyable. So that's very good information. You know, does it have good netcode and so on? That is something that should have been much further up in my opinion, because it's very, very important. It's where people who play this game for more than a week and then forget about it spend like all of their time, right? Certain characters do require unforgiving execution within a short window of frames, such as the Mishimas and their electrics, but Tekken 7 helpfully allows you to practice in training mode while simulating the delay you would expect at various connections. That's a very small and specific feature that is really good and interesting, and so it's funny that they mentioned that. And then we'll just get to the verdict. So the review is over, and let's just talk about all the things that they did not mention. They did not mention a single one of the new characters. They did not mention any of the new game mechanics like Rage Art, for example. They didn't talk about Rage at all. They didn't talk about any of the stages. So, I mean, there was a lot of emphasis on specifically story mode, customization mode. They talked a little bit about music, and then there were just, when this review talked about in-game mechanics, I think half the time it just betrayed like a very poor understanding of how this game actually works. Now, I'm not expecting IGN to produce like a really high-level Tekken player to provide this kind of review, but I do feel like if you're into fighting games and you're wondering whether or not you should get this game, I mean, listen to people who actually play it, and you'll get information that is just so much better. However, I will say that if you are like a casual consumer and you're wondering if you should just pick this up for fun and enjoy the single player modes and whatever, this review sings the praises of like the story mode and customization and all that stuff, and I think that's so completely wrong. It's really bad consumer advice, because the story mode in Tekken 7 is absolute dog shit. It's one of the worst stories I've ever like seen written for any video game I've ever played. It's 3 hours long and it's obviously unfinished. I haven't played it, like I said, but I've watched the thing on YouTube. And it's so obvious that they had this like really ambitious thing they wanted to do, with, you know, cutscenes and characters jumping in from off the screen and then the fight starting, and like sequences when you're shooting people and stuff. And it's so like choppy and unfinished, and then they've just glued it together with these like static images where boring like journalist characters like talks over written exposition. So it's like, I think they just didn't have enough time and they just came up with him to tie all those pieces together. But I mean, none of the characters are like, Nina is in the game. When you start, she's fighting Heihachi, and then instantly Heihachi just says, "Now you work for me," and she just does. We have no idea why she's in the story or what her motivations are. Heihachi travels to like Italy to meet with Claudio and recruit him, and then Claudio joins him and doesn't do anything for the rest of the game. Akuma is like horribly shoehorned in, and we don't know anything about him. They try to explain like Kazumi's role in the story. It's never made clear whether or not she's actually evil, but like possessed by a demon, whether or not she was evil all along and just wanted to kill Heihachi, whether she like loved him at some point or whatever. She just like changes, and they don't explain anything in the story, so it's very confusing. And if you're going to play that, it's going to be a shitty story. You're not going to like enjoy the gameplay, I think. It's going to take you 3 hours, and then it's going to be over. And according to this person, then you can start worrying about treasure battles and customizing your character, and then you're going to get value for money, which is just not true. If you want to customize characters and you want to like play a good story, I mean, pick up an RPG. Play a game where you can actually design your character from scratch and give them a name, where you can like unlock like items that you can put on your character that actually do something, you know, and that has a story written by actual writers, that has like, you know, characters and arcs and things in them. If you're trying to buy this game for its single player modes, you're getting robbed. It's like the worst thing you could ever do. But the game is still fantastic. It's an amazing game because it's so fun to play. competitively in actual matches. But that is, in my opinion, the only reason you should ever pick this game up. It's a very good reason, and I do recommend this game to absolutely everybody who might want to get into fighting games with Tekken, but do not like go out and buy it for its like single player modes, because that is, I mean, that is just a waste of your time and money, in my opinion. Well, let's read the verdict here. Tekken 7 is truly a hallmark, a fighting game crafted with obvious affection. That's very true. Strikes a fine balance between accessibility for newcomers, but retaining much of the technical traditions. That's also true. The soundtrack is an electronic treat. Well, I don't think so, but that's, you know, in opinions, that's fine. And while the story can at times seem a little bit cliche, the fact that it never takes itself too seriously lets it bring in a tremendous amount of... The fact that it never takes itself too seriously lets it bring in a tremendous amount of flexible character customization. The story is a little bit cliche, but the fact that it doesn't take itself seriously lets it bring in flexible character customization. Can you customize characters in story mode? You can't, right? I don't know what that means at all. Does anybody edit these reviews? Its dedication to the details helps push it into the position of my favorite fighting game of 2017. It's a hallmark fighting game that's both accessible and highly technical with great customization options. Okay, that's going to wrap up my thoughts on this review. In conclusion, I think it's incredibly misguided. I think it's bad consumer advice, and I think it's just like a fun read because it's so weird. But I will say that I don't think there's any there's no like weird political agenda being pushed here or anything like that. I think it's like a credible job for somebody who's just trying to write a review for a game that they just don't play at all or don't understand very well. But my advice would be like get somebody in who can do that for you, or don't write the review at all, because it's kind of just a waste of people's time. It's very long and very wordy, and there's not really anything said in this review that has any kind of impact. So I thought that was a really fun read. Hopefully you got a couple of laughs out of reading it with me. I know it's not the kind of content I usually do, but you know, just a fun idea I had. Thank you so much for watching this video. We're going to make more stuff very soon. I'm working on a video that I think is going to be really fun right now, where we're going to deconstruct the concept of cheapness in fighting games. I think that's going to be a really fun one to talk about. But for now, thank you so much for being here, and I'll see you guys again very soon. Bye bye for now.